Dear respected Thệ, dear respected elders, dear noble community, thank you for your presence today and your smiles. We begin as usual with 3 sounds of the bell to invite us back to our upright and relaxed posture, allowing ourselves to come back to the breath and drop everything, all the thoughts. We're present right now together. Dear noble community, good morning. Today is September 15th, 2017, and already we're on the 4th day of our retreat, the 4th day of the U.S. Tour English-speaking retreat at Deer Park Monastery, Awakening the Source of Understanding. Yesterday, our hummingbird discussion group had a very beautiful sharing, collective sharing, and I just wanted to express my deep appreciation for what I'm sure is happening everywhere in all the families dotting Deer Park. A lot of opening, a lot of openness, a lot of insights blossoming. Every time there's an influx of retreatants who come to any of our monasteries, the monastics are bathed again in Dharma rain. And it helps to remind us of our deeper and deepest aspirations. So a heartfelt thank you to all of you for being here. I've been contemplating this beautiful calligraphy behind us, in front of you, behind me. This is it. I think most of us, when we first come to this calligraphy, it's kind of like a declaration. I received it like that, like it was a glib declaration. This is it. And I think it's Thệ, our teacher's, in our tradition, it's his Zen stick to wake us up to the present moment. Take it or take it. This is it. But it's something that goes a little bit more deep, I think, with time, as I've had time to contemplate it, and as it's come up in different ways in the community. So I kind of take it as a koan. It's at once a declaration, and it's at once an invitation for all of us to go deeper into our practice. So from a declaration that we know what's before us, I know who I am, I know what the situation is, to an invitation by our teacher to ask, do we really know what's going on? What is it that it is right now? Who am I right now? Who am I really? What is the situation really? It's an open invitation to explore through the practice a deeper understanding. So declaration to invitation. So I'd like to invite all of us to maybe take a look at this calligraphy from time to time and explore our relationship with it. Is it, in this moment, a declaration for us, a wake-up to the present moment? Or is it a humbling call to invite us to check again and look more deeply through our practice? Every tour we have a chance to meet up again every 2 years among the monastic community. And I met one of my sisters who I haven't met for a while. And in the process of hugging meditation, I had the experience that I was hugging her father and hugging her mother. And it was the first time I had experienced that. It was a shift, and it gave me pause because it came up unexpectedly. So it made me question, I don't really know who my sister is. I've seen my sister in a certain way, but suddenly I'm feeling and sensing and understanding her in a different way. There's been a shift. So who is she really? And who am I really in this moment that has allowed me to shift into this different sphere of awareness? What is this that this is right now? Many of us come to the monastery or retreat because we are seeking something. We are suffering. And I would venture to say probably it's through lack of conditions to be mindful and skillful. And so we have participated in and been the receiver of suffering. And we're seeking something different, something new, to wake us up, to relieve our suffering. But because of a lifetime of living unmindfully, I'm speaking for myself, I came to the monastery with very heavy habit energies. And I didn't realize that I was ignoring vast swaths of me. I just knew the tip of the iceberg of me. So out of ignorance, I would ignore or repress or deny parts of me. Or I would make assumptions about myself or other people rashly. Or out of arrogance, I would judge. And thanks to the practice, it's given me a taste of another way. I can reflect back on my parents now and see how trying it is to be a parent sometimes. Because as children we come and with our awareness, a very limited scope of awareness, we think we already know what it is. And we see the mistakes and the unskillfulnesses of our parents, and we think, what they do, I'm never going to do that. For sure, it's a vow. Not knowing that, because of our lack of awareness, not knowing that they themselves have probably said the very same thing about their parents and their parents before them. Each generation is trying to do better for itself. We just don't realize it because we step in on the scene very confidently, very much without awareness of the bigger picture of which we're a part. So stepping into the practice of mindfulness, it gives us more of a humility of our part, of the efforts, the difficulties of those who've come before us. And it gives us a little bit more patience to continue the practice. We may fix, repair, or transform some of those things that we vowed we would not replicate But at the same time, most probably, we're probably generating some more stuff for the next generation to do the same thing, right? So this is just to say there's no blame, no judgment, but there's a continuing effort, a continuing movement in a direction for us. And this community of practice, it isn't just in this space here, in this space of time, but it's across generations. When I was a novice, some maybe 15, 16 years ago, I remember being a very clumsy attendant of Thệ, our teacher. And as a very unskillful attendant, I would come and just sit in Thay's presence without really opening my heart, opening and knowing what to say, what to receive from our teacher, who is always transmitting his wisdom, his experience in the practice, whether it's verbally or through his energy. But as a novice, sorry, I don't want to say just as a novice, as an unskillful novice, there was like a lump on a log, just in my teacher's presence. And he just observed me very steadily and carefully and quietly. And then he shared with me, everyone is a mystery, each one of us. Each one of us is a whole cosmos waiting to be discovered. It was his gentle encouragement for me to accept me where I was, but also to encourage me to look more deeply. He shared that everyone is a flower waiting for the conditions to open. And I felt his acceptance and his understanding of my gaucheness, my closed-offedness, right in that moment. So many of us come, as monastics, we come looking for something as well. We come to the practice because we feel we want to change something in our life. We feel an emptiness or a lack of. And over again, I see this mirrored in our sharings in the retreats, the question of self-worth and lack of love, that we all come. And that's what I was looking for. I was looking for that, a way to fill that emptiness. Yeah, many of us, maybe I could venture to say all of us, except for the hidden bodhisattva in this audience, who is already quite solid in his or her practice and present in order to offer their protection, their love for other people. So the good news is that we are not alone. We are in good company with one another. We're all seeking more or less the same thing. So one of our sisters asked me before I left Blue Cliff, the monastery that I've come from, the other day, maybe about a week and a half ago, what was the most important thing that I've taken from my monastic path so far. And I shared with her that the most important thing that I've learned so far in the this is it moment is that true love is there, and there's a path to walk, to manifest that true love. And many of us may be surprised that that path is nothing other than the practice of meditation, of stopping and looking deeply. That and only that is already the path, the process, the practice of love. So when we come to the monastery, we seek to feel something, we seek for love. But in the process of stepping into the practice, we start to learn that we can embody love through our practice. It's a very empowering experience. So our path of meditation is our path of love. Can everyone see that? Can you all see the writing in the back? No? Okay. So I'll just reiterate what I'm writing. This is what happens when you don't practice your Zen circle. It just comes out all awry. Okay, so from the declaration of this is it, we start to explore what is this that this is. Meditation is, as we've already started to learn, part stopping, part looking deeply. And when we talk about stopping, stopping is such a key aspect of meditation because it allows us, first of all, to rest. So much of our brain power, our physical energy, it's kind of like an incandescent bulb. There's a lot of energy wastage when we're talking about awakening to something deeper, like deeper peace, deeper happiness. So out of lack of understanding, we run after things, or we run away from things, and we waste a lot of mental energy, physical energy. So the first important aspect of meditation is this stopping. Stopping in order to come back to that place of rest that we may not have known we had the capacity all of our life. That's why sometimes at retreat, everyone feels suddenly very tired after the first 2 days. It's because we've been going full stop for 20, 30, 40 years, and suddenly the conditions are saying, hey, this is it. There's nothing else but you here, so stop. And then everything that we've been pushing aside, repressing, it starts to come up. And it's kind of like a fast, it comes out. So we need this very important step in our practice of meditation in order to kind of reset, to recalibrate ourselves, physically, mentally, even spiritually. Some people stop by changing what they call changing the peg, removing themselves from an environment that is toxic. Some people stop by stepping into a healthier environment like Sangha. Some people stop by removing themselves from stimuli, just plain and simple, just withdrawing in order to start to really listen more deeply to our body. Allow the feelings to come out without inhibiting them or censoring them. And when we stop, anything that I say here can be theoretical, right? So stopping, we've heard that word a lot, but as our Sister Dee shared, the breath is a very concrete tool for us to use in order to practice stopping, because it's with us all the time. So we can anchor our mind, our awareness, to just be aware of the breath, to allow us not to run after those thoughts, those feelings, those things that keep perseverating in us. to always come back to something that is safe, a part of us, to give us some space between the turmoil of our feelings and thoughts and our observant eye. Okay, so stopping is the first aspect of meditation. So above us you can see that we have the Smriti, Samadhi, and Prajna, which is mindfulness, concentration, and insight. And in our tradition, our teacher has substituted mindfulness trainings for mindfulness because we want to emphasize that they are not different from one another. When we practice according to the 5 mindfulness trainings, it trains our mind to become more attentive. It's a training in mindfulness trainings. So the path of love is this cycle over and over again. We become aware, we recognize what is happening in us through stopping and becoming attentive, whether it's our breath, our body, our feelings, or our thoughts. And moment to moment, mindfulness is a moment to moment awareness. We strengthen our awareness of what is it that's happening right now. It's kind of like a string of beads. What's happening here? What's happening here? What's happening here? And this sustained awareness without being pulled away, right? It's one thing to be mindful of your emotions, and it's another thing to be swept up by your emotions. One aspect has just the energy pulling you. The other one is that mindfulness is in control, it's embracing. So this whole process of sustained mindfulness is what we call concentration. Or in our tradition, we also called embracing. Embracing our emotion, embracing our painful feeling in the body from moment to moment. And it's a practice to be able to start to splice up our habit energy of relating to difficulties, challenges, into a moment-to-moment awareness. So this whole part here is what we call embracing. We often hear in our practice it's important not to push away, not to make an enemy of our part of ourselves, for example, our anger or our sadness. So already you can see in this practice, merely of moment-to-moment awareness, there's already love for yourself. In the spirit of mere recognition, we don't judge ourselves for feeling sad or angry. We're just aware, there's anger in me. There's a feeling of heaviness, sadness in me. There's no judgment. And if there's judgment, then it means that right at that point of judgment, then we say, there's judgment. You see, there's a way out of everything. That's the gentleness of this practice. My high school teacher, one of my beloved high school teachers, she used to catch us all the time when the students started grumbling about class and complaining that they were bored. She would put out a statement, if you're bored, that means you're boring. It was like a shutdown. It was a challenge. So you don't want to be boring, so you can't complain anymore, right? So if we feel that we're judging, it just means that we need to recalibrate and bring to our attention that as our object of meditation. Instead of, as Tay would say, the second, third arrow, judging ourselves for judging ourselves, for judging ourselves. We just simply take up in the next moment, hello, judgment, I know you're there. So very gentle, it's a very gentle practice. When we first begin, as I did, I felt very two-dimensional in my mental and emotional landscape. I came to Plum Village feeling very flat. I didn't have any relationship with joy. Didn't even know what that was. And as I've shared with many people, when people told me that I seemed sad, I didn't even understand what that meant. Can anyone relate to that? Yeah. It's just like you're flat, two-dimensional. It's because that seed of joy was very, very deeply in the mud, lying dormant. And so the opening for me was to begin to water that seed of joy. So in the 16 breathing exercises, Sister Dee was kind enough to cover the first 4 and the last 4. Thank you, Sister Dee. Those were the hard parts, so left us with the easier parts. Thank you. So in the 5th breathing exercise, it's precisely that, to wake us up to our potential. You might not think that you are a naturally joyful person, and maybe you're right. But again, mindfulness says it's okay. It doesn't come naturally because that's the landscape that we grew up in. Those are the conditions that we grew up in. But it's there. We know that the joy is there. The happiness is there. So in the 5th exercise of breathing in, again, we use that breath as an anchor. Breathing in, I'm aware of joy in me. It could be manifest, it could be latent, doesn't matter. It's there. Just like these mountains, sometimes there are waterfalls that show up in Deer Park, but they're not here right now, but they're there. It just requires a few more conditions. So when we practice to breathe in, aware of joy, breathe out, aware of joy, it's to wake us up to our potential. Start to build up that two-dimensional aspect of us. Because we all need that spark to be inspired to practice, right? So the Buddha's teaching very kindly shows us the way. We have positive seeds in us. Our parents have positive seeds in them. Again, maybe latent, or right on the cusp of sprouting. Somehow I'm thinking of a tooth, like a wisdom tooth popping up. That's painful. But it's right on the cusp of sprouting. So our practice is to wake it up. And just by breathing in and bringing our attention to the potential, that's watering that seed of joy. Okay. Breathing out, aware that that joy is in me. Let's practice that together and listen to the sound of the bell. Allow the breath to be natural. Allow the presence of your joy to be acknowledged. So in this room, I think we have about 400 people You have 400 very smart people because you've given some fertilizer to your practice. You kind of kickstart these seeds by placing yourself in an environment that recognizes and acknowledges you who you are now, but also your potential to be more whole, more holistic, more happy. Sometimes we don't know what brings us joy, and so one thing that can help us is to take some time. The retreat is a perfect time to do this. To take some time to reflect on what naturally has brought you joy in the past. Maybe you're in a kind of dry spell right now, feeling a bit down or touching some grief, some difficulty, but remember that joy, that peace is there. So take time to remember in the recent or distant past what kind of environment, what kind of activity, what kind of endeavor brings you joy. So you can remember for yourself experientially, I can touch that, I used to touch that. And then if you really want to bring a little bit more fertilizer to the seed, then go find those kind of activities here or when you leave. Find a sangha, find people who are like-minded in endeavor, and water that. And you'll see that that joy will sprout. And it's the same with happiness. The sixth exercise is breathing in, aware of the feeling of happiness in me. It's more of a deep contentment. And even though we have many storms in our life is not always stormy, right? There are moments when the clouds part. And there are moments with the mindfulness practice that if we touch it, we can affirm, acknowledge our capacity to be at ease, at peace. So these exercises help us to become more three-dimensional. Right? Our landscape is three-dimensional. And not only do the fifth and sixth exercises of touching joy and happiness allow us to affirm this in ourselves, but it also helps us now to become more intimate, more real with our suffering. So in my situation, sorrow comes easily to me, and I came to Plum Village in that state of mind, but not knowing that I was depressed, very flatline, right? But once I began to touch my potential joy, I had a baseline to then understand when I was again dipping into sorrow, dipping into sadness, and the landscape became much more vibrant. So I would like to invite you to ask yourselves what brings you joy, to take time to reflect on what brings you joy, and to take time to reflect on those moments where you have felt a natural peace, natural happiness, because that's part of you too. In our first talk, Sister Dangi mentioned the four establishments of mindfulness. With my lack of awareness, I wasn't aware of the coming of my sorrow or the dissipation of my sorrow. But in the Sutra on the Four Establishments of Mindfulness, it says, if you're not aware, if you don't have that capacity yet of mindfulness to be attentive, like attentive to the breath all the way in, attentive to the breath all the way out, if you're not aware of when that surge of sorrow or anger or fear is coming, or you're not mindful enough to be able to see it gradually dissipating, at least, and here again is the gentle way out, at least we can be aware that it's there. Right there. Many of us have skipped that step, so this is our way in. We acknowledge, without judgment, that it's there. That's already a relief. It's that big elephant in the room that finally you can say, yeah, I feel suicidal. I'm feeling that. And it's okay. I'm feeling this deep rage towards someone that I feel guilty for feeling rage towards. And it's okay. It's there. It's there. So breathing in, aware that it's there. The sutra invites us to just breathe with that awareness until we have a deeper understanding. Moment to moment, it's there. It's there. It's still there. Goodness, it's there. It's there. Wow, it's gone. Right? So this is impermanence at work. Oh, it's gone. I have a little bit more faith in my capacity to be resilient. I've passed that storm. I can do it. I'm going to do it again. So this act of stopping is love for ourselves. We're not stabbing ourselves again and again with judgment or blame. This act of putting down, letting go and becoming mindful of each moment of affliction is also love, because when you love, you are patient, right? When you love, you are present for your loved ones. You see things through without judgment. So this practice, as I said, is an act of love. If you're looking for love, meditate, because you are loving yourself. And when we gather enough strength of mindfulness, we become aware of what's going on in our body and our mind. Suddenly, insight arises. Our teacher shares that insight is, it's not something that you analyze and get to, like A plus B, therefore D minus 6. I think I understand. If we're using that kind of language, I think I get it, then we haven't got it yet. One of my sisters asks me, do you understand what I'm saying? And I honestly, the only thing I can really honestly reply is, I think I understand what you're getting at. Because we can only really understand when it comes from our lived experience. So until then, until it feels like you understand, like you really have an insight, it's just conjecture, it's just intellectual activity. Blah, 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 blah. Yeah. So insight, our teacher shares that insight, it has, just for abbreviation, awareness of causes, awareness of the conditions for whatever this is that we are looking at, aware of the consequences, very concrete. So our insight, causes, conditions, and consequences. The ego, or what we call, in Western psychology, we'd call ego. In Buddhist psychology, we'd call manas. So that's that part of our consciousness that claims for itself I, me, mine, is very self-protective. And I discovered something quite interesting about my own ego. My own ego. I discovered that it's not necessarily wanting to feel better, like we would say something that would boost your ego, it just wants to protect itself. So the manas, or our ego, always seeks the easy way out. It always seeks to bypass this practice of love, like true love, and it seeks to jump over to what it calls fake, it's insight, it's fake insight. This is because he's a dirt bag. Right? So easy, right? That is because the world is weighted against me. But causes and conditions are plentiful. It's not simple like that. That's why when we say, this is it, it's an invitation to look deeply. It's not simple like that. So if your ego is making easy conclusions, again, my high school teacher is saying, yeah, that means it's a bell of mindfulness to really practice true love. Stop and come back to mere recognition. We don't say, this is because of blah, 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 and make a whole story without doing the work of love. So my insight into my own ego is that I often say negative things about myself. If I were to protect my ego, then I wouldn't say things like, this is because I'm a failure. I can never do this. I'm not worth it. But these are words, these are thoughts, these are self-inflicted wounds that I bring up for myself. It's my manas speaking without doing the work. It's protecting itself. Even if that self is beaten and battered, it's still protecting itself. So where is the love in that? Right? So if we feel that we suffer from a very critical mind of ourselves, we feel that we really don't have a sense of self-worth, that we're not worth anything, please use those words that you speak as a bell of mindfulness to come back to the foundation of stopping and just recognizing, I'm speaking judgmentally, I'm not loving. And in that process, you are starting to love, you are starting to open up that flower of who you are. Are you following what I'm saying? Yeah, very gentle practice. So once we embrace our feelings or our thoughts, our physical body, where there is an insight that arises, an insight of interbeing. I see your mother in you, I see your father in you. I see my mother in me, I see my father in me. It means that our awareness, this insight, has grown in scope. The other day, was it yesterday, in the 5 mindfulness trainings, I'm sure we also discussed this in our Dharma sharing. Who remembers what every single 5 mindfulness trainings starts with? What words? Awareness of suffering caused by, yeah. So this is it. Right now, the suffering is because of you. Insight. Suffering is because maybe something that I did that caused you to do. The suffering is from your mom and dad. Okay, let's leave it at that. Right? The point is that our awareness can always grow. Our insight can always grow. So this is it right now is not the same as this is it in the future, if we're practicing. We can also regress. If you don't recite your 5 MTs and you put aside your practice, we can also regress. But if we are diligent, then we're growing our awareness, our insight. And the great luminaries of the world, our teacher being one, they have a very inclusive awareness that allows them to speak universal truths that in an instant we recognize in ourselves, right? It's because they've done this work of looking deeply, this whole practice of from mere recognition with concentration to sustained awareness. They've done that work so that they can include all of our experiences. They can see their experiences in a global way. So that's an aspiration maybe for our OI, our bodhisattvas to be. We'll come back to the Bodhisattva vow a little bit later. So recently I've been playing a little bit in the garden and realizing again how concretely clueless I am about gardening. I asked my sister if I could pull up the dill because we're remaking some beds, garden beds. And she told me, that's not dill, that's asparagus. So I realized that dill, when it's ripe for harvest, looks a lot like old asparagus. Did you know that? So this is maybe we can call this our heart, our mind, that we are continuing to hone and train, purify. And what it's honing, purifying, and training through the four establishments of mindfulness, it needs to be fed by something, right? So let's pretend our mind is a turnip or whatever. Like I said, I'm not a gardener, but whatever kind of root vegetable that you plant, right? And it's in a soil, and that soil is what we call the four nutriments. Okay. These are different elements of our soil. And okay. Okay, how many of us are familiar with the four nutriments? Okay, can you name me one of these? ESVC? Edible foods. Edible food, that's the first one. Anyone else? Volition, that's the V. Sorry? Sense impressions, that's the S. And consciousness, fun word to say, consciousness. Okay, so those are the four nutriments, and we call them nutriments. Why? Because nutriments are something that feed us. That's the definition of what is a nutriment. Otherwise, it's just something else. So a nutriment is what feeds us. The question is, what is it feeding in our mind? It's very helpful to learn about four nutriments because, first of all, we can then recognize what's going in. The mindfulness gatekeeper can name what's coming into our body, our mind. Otherwise, we don't know what's coming through us, in and out. I have no idea. So how can we practice when you don't have any idea? Secondly, it's important because if you know and can recognize, if you have the conditions, then you can start to choose wisely your environment. You no longer are a victim of your environment because knowing what is more beneficial, you can step in that direction. Knowing what is not so beneficial, the gossip, the drugs, whatever, you can make some decisions to step away from that environment. You empower yourself So the four nutriments are there as a tool of awareness to look. These are very vast categories, so I would like to just touch on a few points in each one and invite you to explore in your Dharma sharing group today your continual relationship with these areas. So edible food. One interesting thing about edible food is that I like that term comfort food a lot. We all have our own comfort food. Comfort food isn't necessarily healthy for you. It makes you feel good. That's why it's a comfort food. So many of us, our comfort food is Doritos or Burger King along the way. Many of us, it doesn't matter what it is as long as it's the quantity. It becomes a comfort food because our relationship with it is unhealthy. Okay? So the difference between a nutriment that just simply feeds us to keep us going, keep our bad habit energies going, and a nutriment that is nourishing is that it nourishes what? It nourishes a deeper understanding in us. It nourishes our capacity to heal. If it's not nourishing a deeper understanding in us or a capacity to heal, then it's not really a nourishment. Okay? So edible food, the question to ask ourselves is this a comfort food? Is this healthy for my body and mind? Or does it simply make me feel good? Some people binge because it's a coping mechanism, but in the long run it harms the body. It harms our mind. It weakens our capacity to be resilient in the face of challenge. More and more we go to the food to fill that void. So begin that relationship with your food. Why do we practice mindful eating here? It's so we can recognize what's going in our body and how we relate to it. Are we stuffing ourselves? Are we choosing wisely our food? Are we using it to hide? In our monastic community, we are taught, it's really a training to look at food as a medicine. And I am the first to admit I'm very far away from that. But I just share this with you because it's kind of like a northern star for us to look at a different way of relating to food. Some people are in that space where they really use food as medicine to nourish their spiritual life, not to feed their craving or to help run away because they have an aversion to something. Okay, so edible food. What's our comfort food and why? That's a question. Sense impressions. So our sense impressions are a vast area in and of itself. We know that we consume not just by our mouth, but by all of our senses, including our mind. And again, knowing what's coming in, we can choose not to engage in those conversations that are draining, that make us feel world weary after a while or down. The political commentary, not because it's political in and of itself, but maybe the quantity, the intensity, the duality of the messages coming from those folks. Every little thing that comes into us makes up what we process in our mind, and it becomes part of our mind. Remember, this is the soil that our mind is pulling from. So if you want to make it easier to practice, a wise practitioner will start to gatekeep what's coming in your senses. Right? So looking at how we can gatekeep, it means what is it coming in, how much is coming in, and in what way is it coming in? How much, what, and in what way? Again, being in a wholesome environment. I was really touched at Blue Cliff during our tour retreat. One of my sisters, Sister Jendin, she came down with a cold. No, it was more like a virus. She was, I think, one of the first who kind of got that wave of whatever. And she was still not feeling so well, but I caught her pulling herself to the activities. I think it was the ordination or the 5 mindfulness trainings there. And I crossed paths with her as she was going to the activity. I said, "Oh, Sham, you should be resting. Are you feeling okay?" And she said, I just want to nourish myself." I'm paraphrasing, she didn't say that exactly. But her intent was to nourish herself, to place herself in an environment where her senses were drinking in something that was wholesome. And that's what we're doing here. That's what we're doing here by just being present for ourselves in this environment. And I benefit so much from this kind of environment as well. I remember recently, maybe a month or 2 ago, I'm very bad with time, forget it. Anyway, more recently, I remember listening to a talk of one of our brothers about going vegan. That was the title, Going Vegan. And this is the kind of sensory impression that we receive when we're in a Dharma center. We have reminders that allow us to wake up to suffering without drowning in the suffering. In a non-practice environment, we're suffering, we're surrounded by suffering, and we're drowning in it. But in a practice environment, we have a different relationship. We begin to recognize it and know our relationship, our practice relationship with our suffering. So listening to that talk, it helped me to wake up again my aspiration to live a more compassionate life, to look again at my assumptions about veganism. In our community, by and large, we're vegan, but not all the time, and not everyone. I think in the end, it's something for us to, each one of us, ask ourselves what our aspirations are, what our understanding and our priorities are, and then continue to look at skillful ways to move in the direction of compassion. So our sense impressions, it can either help us to wake up, or it can dull and distract us, right? When we're dull and distracted, it's very hard to touch that deeper inspiration or aspiration to be wholesome. We become that two-dimensional side again. So it's important to know how much and what we're taking in so that we can learn to put that aside, to what we call move the seaweed aside, so we have a little bit more clarity, a little bit more inspiration, a little bit more faith in the practice, and we keep moving forward in waking up, waking up. Okay, volition. In one of our chants, there's a very, very beautiful line. Apart from bodhicitta and apart from the thirst for great understanding and the embodiment of love, there is no other desire in me. That's maybe we could call that a manifestation of the bodhisattva vow. No pressure. There is no other desire in me besides a deep thirst for great understanding, no matter what my ego wants, and the embodiment of love, no matter what my ego wants. So this is an example of a volition that pulls us forward, that challenges us to break down the walls that we build up to protect our sense of pride, our sense of self. And we're all on that path, But of course, there are things that keep pulling us back. We want a little bit of fame, maybe. We want a little good reputation. We want a little bit of fortune. We have attachments to some material things, material necessities. And the more deeply we go into our practice, the more strength and courage we have to call our mental formations by their true name. Yeah, I'm actually going a little bit after, I'm being a little bit ambitious here. It's not for the good of the Sangha, it's for me, you know? Sangha building is an endeavor that also has its impurities. And as Sangha builders, we are purifying ourselves to purify the Sangha, because the Sangha is our boat to a deeper understanding. So the volition, it can be impure, but it's okay. There's aspects of positive and negative, and the practice of mindfulness is just to be aware and start to choose wisely. Start to let go of those things once we recognize it's not really serving our well-being, others' well-being so well. And lastly, one of the fourth is consciousness. And I was having a conversation with one of my brothers the other day, and he was talking about the Native American community and the tribe. We all belong to a tribe. In America, sometimes our tribe is a tribe of one, or maybe two or four. A Sangha is a tribe of many. We're a tribe here. To me, a tribe is a collective, common, something common. And in a practice community, the commonality is our aspiration towards wholesome living, awakening, understanding. So the more we practice, the larger our tribe. We can be a very good father to our child. We can be a very protective mother to our child, but at the cost of something larger. It's a kind of selfish love. The larger our heart, the larger we can embrace those who we normally would call other, different, and see their well-being and their suffering as our own. So when we hear the practice, this is individual as well as a collective practice. In society, when we hear voices calling out, we practice to hear it in the light of their suffering and to see it as part of our own. Why is it that some people are speaking up and asking for our awareness? And what is our reaction to that? Is it from a place of inclusion, or is it a place of exclusion? That's their issue. Why are they being so uppity now? Or are we practicing in the light truly of meditation, an openness, an inclusiveness, a patience, a willingness to go there? Just a bell of mindfulness. If we're not willing to go there with whatever the issue is, whatever social justice issue that is, it's to let us know maybe our awareness isn't yet there. And again, we come back to mere recognition. That's already an opening. That's already a way of including, of being open to the possibilities. It's not, this is something right here, but maybe there's something larger that I'm not yet aware of. Okay. So beware of this crashing here. Gate crashing of the ego. This is our manas talking. And when we talk about beginning anew, we're talking about not jumping to conclusions. We're talking about being willing to revisit going there, being willing to revisit those afflictions, those perceptions, those feelings that popped up, and communicating with one another. This is what was happening with me when I yelled at you. This is what was happening when I slammed the door. So that collectively between you and your loved one, you can understand more deeply, gather with awareness, 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 gather these jewels to come to a truer insight together. That's basically beginning anew at its heart, and it's part of meditation. It's part of willingness to go the distance of awareness, of communicating, of not jumping to conclusions. And that's an act of love. I've been in situations where people refuse to talk to me. It's painful, right? And perhaps you've been in situations where even if you want to, something's preventing you from opening your heart. There's a hurt. Opening your heart to let that person know that I'm suffering, and I want you to know that. I'm suffering and I'm practicing, and I want you to know that. So, if we have that block, it means that we need to come back to our basic place of refuge, the in-breath, the out-breath, and mere recognition. There was one thing I forgot to mention. Very important aspect that supports mere recognition, and that is appropriate attention. Does anyone want to garner a definition of what appropriate attention is? What is appropriate attention? What makes something appropriate versus inappropriate attention?
Leads to the experience of it's wholesome.
It leads to the experience of wholesomeness and well-being. Right. So appropriate attention, it's basically that. Anything that waters or moves us in the direction of well-being, whether that's nourishment or whether that's healing of a suffering. Inappropriate attention is attention that is watering seeds that lead us away from the direction of happiness, peace, of insight, of interbeing. So if we're looking at someone with the eye of curiosity, of suspicion, kind of like that curious, gossipy type of thing, that is inappropriate attention. If we want to dig into a conflict or an issue to find fault, and we're looking and listening to that person sharing to catch something that will defend our view, that's inappropriate attention. It just means it's not wholesome. It's not beneficial for you and, of course, the other person. But if you're willing to go there because you have the desire to open up and really understand the suffering holistically, your part included, and if you have the strength to do that, it doesn't wallop you, that's appropriate attention. And this brings us to the Bodhisattva vow. So the OI, the Order of Interbeing trainings are our version in our tradition of the Bodhisattva vow. It's a path to open our heart wide, to be inclusive of so many more people than what we normally would call our society, our tribe. And it requires that kind of aspiration to go there. to go where there is difficulty with the right intention and with the capacity. It's important that we know our capacity, because if we go there but we're not strong enough, we'll be overwhelmed, we'll be burnt out. Just ask any of our social activists who come feeling helpless and hopeless, feeling a lack of support. It means that they need more conditions to strengthen, to be strong in the face of a lot of challenges out there. Right? Okay, so taking care of our soil means just to be aware of what's coming into our mind and what's the consequences of that. Alcohol may be enjoyable, it may be a social lubricant, but somewhere down the line it may be watering seeds of addiction in either ourselves or our children, a latent seed of addiction. It may be watering seeds of unskillful speech and action in any of the, as we can see reflected in the 5 mindfulness trainings. So aware of the consequences is part of our insight to help us put it down. Maybe not this time. It's not so necessary. So this is it. This is it. And I share that in a way, what I mean is this is it as an insight, not a declaration. Humbly, we can share in our heart, this is it, and this is it, and this is it. And it's very empowering to be a practitioner in this time. Thé often says peace in oneself, peace in the world. Maybe some of us feel it's very difficult to be peaceful in ourselves when there's a lot of violence around us, a lot of adverse excuse me. A lot of adverse conditions around us. Or peace, or love, We may have grown up in very harsh conditions, so it's kind of hard, it's hard to convince ourselves that peace in ourselves first, then peace in the world. We're waiting for it to be given to us. Give me some peace first, and then I'll give you some peace back. Show me what love is, and I'll show you what love is back. But who can argue with wholesome living? That's really firmly in the grasp. That's our responsibility. It's not my responsibility to have you live wholesomely. That's you. That's on you. So wholesome living in oneself is a wholesome life for our children, for our society. And from that, we understand well-being. From that, we understand peace. And love also comes from ourselves. So we end as we began. This is it. And happy continuation in your practice. Thank you.